Julius Caesar, his brave attire, and the tragic end. Julius Caesar, the Roman general and statesman, was as much a man of bold action as he was of grand appearance. Known for his immaculate sense of dress and presence, Caesar often appeared in a long, flowing purple robe, a symbol of power and divinity in Rome. He wore a laurel wreath, not merely as a military honor, but also to conceal his thinning hair, embracing both vanity and symbolism. His attire reflected his self-image, dignified, authoritative, and destined for greatness. But beneath the silken folds of majesty, danger brewed. Though loved by the people for his reforms and victories, Caesar stirred envy and fear among senators. He had crossed the Rubicon, claimed victories in Gaul, returned to Rome as a hero, and declared himself dictator for life. On the Ides of March 44 BCE, dressed in his formal robe, Caesar entered the theater of Pompey for a Senate meeting. He was unaware that beneath the respectful togas around him lay hidden daggers. In a brutal betrayal, more than 20 senators, including his trusted friend Brutus, stabbed him 23 times. His rich robes were soaked in blood, the fabric of power, now a shroud of tragedy. His final words, "Et tu, brute," captured the heartbreak of betrayal, marking one of history's most dramatic and tragic ends. Caesar died not just as a ruler, but as a symbol of how ambition, loyalty, and power can collide in fatal consequence. The story of Julius Caesar, from general to legend. The Fall of the Republic, a historical brief novel on Julius Caesar. Author Shri.
Rajeev Shantalam Thatte.
Prologue. The soothsayers warning the streets of Rome bustled with the pulse of empire. Merchants hawking spices, soldiers clank in armor, philosophers debating in smoky corners. In the crowd, a hunched old man with wild eyes grabbed Caesar's robe. "Beware the Ides of March," he whispered. Julius Caesar blinked, more amused than alarmed. "The Ides?" he asked. "You speak in riddles, prophet." "I speak in blood," said the soothsayer. As Caesar walked away, laughter rippling behind him, the shadow of fate followed like a silent vulture. Chapter 1. The Making of a Roman Rome. 85 BCE, the city stank of smoke, sweat, and ambition. The air was thick with the rumble of hooves, clamor of coins, and the secrets of power whispered behind silk curtains. Amid this tumult, a boy of noble birth defied a dictator. Gaius Julius Caesar was barely 15 when Sulla, the self-proclaimed dictator of Rome, demanded that he divorce his wife Cornelia. She was the daughter of Cinna, one of Sulla's enemies. For a young patrician, obedience meant survival. But Caesar refused. "I will not put away Cornelia," he said. "You would risk death?" asked his uncle. "I would risk my soul," Caesar replied. Sulla confiscated his inheritance and placed a bounty on his head. Caesar fled the city, disguised as a commoner, hiding in swamps and forests. He grew lean and hardened, surviving on roots and rebellion. Yet he never cursed Rome. He studied her power, her people, her weaknesses. When Sulla died and Caesar returned, he did so not as a frightened boy, but as a man carved by exile. He pursued rhetoric in Rhodes, honing words as sharp as daggers. In Asia Minor, he fought pirates and showed his mettle. Captured once, he laughed at his captors. "You ask 20 talents? I'm worth at least 50. He promised to crucify them once ransomed. They thought he joked. He did not. By the time he returned to Rome, the city had changed, but so had Caesar. He was charming, ruthless, eloquent, and hungry. Not for wealth, not even for revenge. He hungered for Rome herself. As he stood beneath the bronze statue of Romulus, founder of the city, he whispered, "I will not be second. Not in history, not in the hearts of men." And so began the rise of the man who would remake the world. Chapter 2. The rise begins Rome. 70 BCE, Caesar strode through the Forum with the confident grace of a man who had seen death and laughed. His toga was immaculately draped, his eyes always scanning, not just faces, but intentions. The Senate loomed in the background, a house of brittle egos and wounded pride. He had returned to Rome as a war hero and was elected military tribune. But Caesar wanted more than applause. He sought transformation. He befriended the people, bread for the hungry, games for the restless, debts forgiven. He gave Rome what it craved: attention. Behind every act of charity was a calculation. Behind every smile, ambition. Soon he became audible, organizing lavish games that drained his fortune but filled the city with whispers of his greatness. Gladiators fought beneath banners bearing his name. Crowds cheered not just the blood, but the man who gave it to them. Then came the funeral of his aunt, Julia, widow of Marius, the enemy of Sulla. Caesar eulogized her with words soaked in history and defiance. She was noble by birth and noble by action, he declared, as was her husband, the savior of Rome. The Senate squirmed. The people roared. He was elected Pontifex Maximus, chief priest of Rome, in a surprising victory that unnerved the old guard. A whisper began to circle the Palatine Hill. Is Caesar reaching for a crown? He brushed it aside with laughter and garlands. But he was watching, listening, waiting. It was in Hispania, while serving as governor, that Caesar stood before a statue of Alexander the Great and wept. "I am 35, he said to a companion, and Alexander had conquered the world by this age. The tears were not of despair, but of decision. That night, he wrote to Crassus, the richest man in Rome, and to Pompey, the Republic's greatest general. Let us share power, he proposed. Let us control Rome together. Thus began the first triumvirate. Chapter 3. The first triumvirate Rome, 60 BC, in a smoky tavern near the Tiber. Three of the most powerful men in Rome sat at a marble table, speaking in low, urgent tones. Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey. Three ambitions forged in different furnaces had agreed to an uneasy alliance. Crassus, a man of immense wealth, had the money. Pompey, the celebrated general, had the legions. Caesar, the cunning politician, had the people. Together, they would bypass the Senate and rule Rome in the shadows. But alliances made in ambition are not always built to last. The triumvirate's first target was the consulship. Caesar ran for office with the backing of his two allies and won. His agenda was radical land for veterans, reforms for the poor, curbs on senatorial excess. The Senate resisted, but Caesar wielded Pompey's troops and Crassus gold like twin blades. He married of his daughter Julia to Pompey, binding his general with blood. To Crassus, he offered profitable governorships and tax deals. Rome bent to their will. For 5 years, the triumvirate held sway. Caesar took command of Gaul and crossed into lands no Roman had dared to tame. He fought the fierce Helvetii, the cunning Belgae, and the wild Britons. Victory followed victory, but with glory came envy. While Caesar's legions carved an empire in the north, Pompey remained in Rome praised, yes, but outshone. Crassus, ever greedy, marched east to conquer Parthia, where he would find only death. The balance shifted. Julia died in childbirth, severing the bond between Caesar and Pompey. In the Senate, murmurs turned into movements. Caesar is becoming too powerful, they said. Let him return to Rome without his legions. But Caesar knew better. To return without his army was to walk into a trap. And so, standing on the banks of the Rubicon, he faced his final choice. Behind him, Gaul. Ahead, civil war. The die is cast, he said, and crossed the river. Chapter 4: The Rubicon and the Road to Rome. 49 BCE, as Caesar's boots touched the southern banks of the Rubicon, time seemed to hold its breath. He knew what it meant by law. No Roman general could bring legions into Italy. By doing so, he declared war on the Senate itself. His men followed in silence. Veterans who had fought alongside him in Gaul looked to their commander with unwavering loyalty. Caesar turned to them. There is no turning back, he said. We march on Rome not as traitors, but as liberators. Pompey, caught off guard, fled the city with the Senate. He comes as a tyrant, the senators cried. But the people cheered Caesar's name. He moved swiftly, seizing city after city with barely a drop of blood. In Rome, Caesar entered unopposed. The forum was quiet, the Senate chamber empty. He did not gloat. He restored order, declared amnesty, and set about stabilizing the capital. But Pompey regrouped in Greece, raising legions. War loomed again. Caesar left Mark Antony in charge of Rome and crossed the Adriatic. The two titans clashed at Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Pompey had numbers. Caesar had genius. With a bold flanking maneuver and brilliant discipline, Caesar shattered Pompey's forces. The great general fled to Egypt. Caesar followed into the heat, the intrigue, and the arms of a queen named Cleopatra. Chapter 5: Caesar and the Queen of the Nile, Alexandria. 48 BCE, the city was a jewel of the East, glittering under the desert sun. Marble palaces shimmered beside the Mediterranean, and knowledge poured from the halls of the great library. Yet Alexandria was torn. The young Queen Cleopatra had been cast out by her brother Ptolemy XIII, and civil war brewed within Egypt's golden walls. Caesar arrived in pursuit of Pompey, but was met with horror. The boy king's regents had murdered Pompey and presented his severed head to Caesar as a gift. Caesar recoiled. This was a Roman consul, he said, and you butchered him like an animal. He wept not for the enemy, but for the death of Roman honor. Then Cleopatra came to him, not through formal petition, but smuggled in a carpet. She emerged in his chamber, radiant and proud. Her voice was music, her wit razor sharp. "Rome has sent me a conqueror," she said. "I offer you a queen." He laughed and stayed. Their alliance was swift, strategic, and seductive. Caesar supported her claim to the throne. Together, they defeated Ptolemy's forces on the Nile. Egypt embraced its queen once more, and Caesar became more than a general. He became a god in the eyes of the people. He lingered in Alexandria, fathered a son, Caesarion, and reveled in the opulence of the East. But back in Rome, unrest stirred. The Senate feared he would not return. Rumors spread. Caesar wished to be king. When he finally left Egypt, he took Cleopatra and their son to Rome, causing scandal among the patricians. Still, he was declared dictator for 10 years. He reformed laws, redistributed land, and planned campaigns in the east. But power breeds resentment. In the shadows, daggers were being drawn. Chapter 6. The Ides of March, Rome. 44 BCE, the city hummed with tension. From the marble colonnades of the Senate to the bustling streets of the Forum, whispers of Caesar's power filled every corner. He had returned from Egypt not just as a conqueror, but as a living legend. His victories over Pompey, his rule over Egypt, and his sweeping reforms had turned the Republic on its head. Now, more than ever, he was Rome's dictator, powerful, untouchable, and in many eyes, a king in all but name. Yet in the Senate, a growing faction plotted his downfall, led by none other than Marcus Junius Brutus, the son of Caesar's former lover, Servilia. Brutus had once been a loyal ally, a confidant, even a friend. But his sense of honor, his belief in the Republic, could not reconcile with the direction in which Caesar was heading. The whispers grew louder. Caesar is becoming a tyrant. In the dark corners of the Senate, the conspirators met. Cassius Longinus, the instigator of the plot, fanned the flames of discontent. "Caesar believes himself above the law," he said. "He calls himself dictator for life, but the people will only tolerate so much. We must strike before it is too late." Brutus, torn between loyalty and duty, knew his mother, Servilia, would want him to act. She had always been close to Caesar, and her jealousy of Cleopatra's influence over the dictator only added fuel to the fire. Brutus felt his connection to Caesar slipping, his family's honor threatened by the rising tide of autocracy. The conspirators decided 15th March 1944 BCE, the Ides of March, would be the day. Caesar would come to the Senate. They would be waiting. The Ides of March, the morning of 15th March, broke with an uneasy quiet. Caesar, now accustomed to the adoration and fear he commanded, began his day with the usual procession. His wife, Calpurnia, begged him not to go to the Senate that day. She had dreamed of his death, of blood and omens that did not bode well. "Do not go, my love," she pleaded. "I fear for you." But Caesar, ever the pragmatist, brushed aside her concerns. "The Ides will come and go, as they always do," he said, and smiled to himself. In the Senate, the conspirators assembled, dressed in their finest to avoid suspicion. Brutus was there, standing apart from the others. His mind swirled with doubt, but his feet were set on a course from which there was no turning back. As Caesar entered, the Senate stood in deference. He was the sun around which Rome orbited. Yet even as he approached the seat of power, he could feel something in the air, an unnatural stillness. The faces of the senators, so familiar, now seemed distant, their eyes avoiding his gaze. It was as though the very room was holding its breath. Brutus, who stood before Caesar, stepped forward as the conspirators closed in. "Caesar," he began, his voice trembling, "I cannot stand by while Rome is enslaved. You have crossed the line. You've betrayed us all." Caesar raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, Brutus?" he asked softly, more curious than alarmed. "Do you mean to rule as a king?" Brutus's voice cracked, but he continued, "We have given you everything, and yet you demand more. More power, more land. Where does it end?" The moment stretched on, hanging like a blade over Caesar's head. Then, as though on cue, Cassius and the others struck. The first dagger plunged into Caesar's side. His body jerked in surprise. Then another and another, blades gleaming in the sunlight that streamed through the Senate windows. The senators crowded around him, their faces tight with rage and fear. "Et tu, brute?" Caesar gasped as he saw the final blow come from Brutus, the one man he thought he could trust. Brutus's eyes were filled with tears, but there was no turning back. "For Rome," he whispered, his voice thick with anguish. As Caesar's blood spilled onto the Senate floor, the world seemed to crumble. In his final moments, Caesar's eyes sought out Brutus, his beloved protege, the son he never had, now his executioner. And then, with a final breath, he fell. The Senate erupted into chaos. The conspirators stepped back, their victory hollow. The Republic was free, they thought. But what came next was not freedom, it was destruction. Epilogue. After the storm, the death of Caesar did not bring peace to Rome. The streets ran with blood as the Republic teetered on the edge of civil war. Brutus, the man who had struck the fatal blow, became a symbol of lost honor and of the failure of the Republic itself. Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted lieutenant, took control of the funeral arrangements. In a powerful speech, he riled the crowd, turning them against the conspirators. "Friends, Romans, countrymen," he cried, holding up Caesar's bloody toga. "The man who conquered Gaul, Egypt, and the heart of Rome is dead. Who will now stand for you? Who will now lead you to greatness?" His words stirred the masses, and soon Brutus and the other conspirators were hunted down like dogs. But Rome had already begun its descent into tyranny. Mark Antony, once Caesar's ally, now turned against Octavian Caesar's adopted heir, and the stage was set for a new war for power. Chapter 7. The Rise of Augustus Rome, 43 BCE, barely 20. Gaius Octavius returned to Rome in the chill of winter, summoned by a will that bore his name. Caesar's dying words had adopted him as son and heir. The city's marble streets whispered his father's name, yet few believed the boy could fill such colossal footsteps. Mark Antony, colleague and commander, scoffed at the youth's claim. He ordered Octavian's escort to kill the upstart before the Senate could confirm his rank. Octavian narrowly escaped, disguised in a slave's cloak, heart pounding with both fear and fury. At dawn, He stood before the Senate. Parents, soldiers, and senators packed the curia, awaiting Antony's decree. Instead, Octavian's clear voice rang out, "I am Caesar's son. His blood and name belong to Rome, and I claim them in his memory." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Cicero, the orator of the Republic, rose to support him, invoking Caesar's legacy and the sanctity of his will. The Senate, caught between awe and dread, granted Octavian the title of Imperator and a seat among Rome's rulers. But forgiveness did not quell Antony's wrath. He raised legions against Octavian, and civil war threatened anew. In the city of Bononia, the two former allies met beneath a torchlit tent. There stood Lepidus, the third power-hungry triumvir, flanked by scribes and soldiers. Together, they swore the oath of vengeance. Blood for blood, rise for Rome. Thus was born the second triumvirate, Antony with the east, Octavian with the west, and Lepidus with Africa. They drew their swords across the Republic's map, carving provinces as equal spoils. In the spring of 42 BCE, their armies converged at Philippi. On the plains of Macedonia, Brutus and Cassius, the assassins of Caesar, awaited with embattled strength and desperate courage. Octavian watched from his siege ramp as Antony's legions clashed in the first battle. Caesar's emblem, a silver eagle, flew above both camps. When the sun rose on the second day, the tide had turned. Brutus's forces collapsed. Cassius, believing his friend defeated, fell on his sword before news of Brutus's retreat could reach him. Brutus fought on, honoring his oath to the Republic. But as defeat became inevitable, he, too, chose death over captivity. Octavian strode among the carnage. He knelt by Cassius' body and whispered, "You freed Rome at too great a cost." Yet even as he mourned, his eyes turned toward Antony, whose gaze lingered on Cleopatra's distant throne. Rome had been avenged, but its soul lay in ruin. In the ashes of Philippi, Octavian emerged not as the boy who had fled an assassin's blade, but as a leader with armies at his back and Rome's destiny in his hands. Chapter 8. The lovers at War Mundus, 39 BC, in the heat of the eastern sun, to hearts beat in unison and defiance. Mark Antony and Cleopatra had forged an empire of passion in Alexandria, a city that thrummed with their ambition. Antony, once Caesar's noble lieutenant, found in Cleopatra not just an ally, but a mirror to his own grandeur. Together they ruled the East. Antony leading legions, Cleopatra weaving politics with her legendary charm. Yet whispers of their union spread to Rome as poison. Octavian, now styling himself Augustus, painted them as traitors to Roman blood, a general seduced by a foreign queen, ready to sell Rome's soul for the Nile's gold. In the Senate, voices cried for war. Antony and Cleopatra laughed at the threat until Rome's legions gathered at Actium's shore. Antony marshaled ships beneath Alexandria's walls. Cleopatra's fleet bore the standards of Egypt, and Rome entwined in gold. The battle that dawned on 2nd September 1931 BCE would decide their fate. Under a sky streaked with crimson, the fleets clashed. Antony fought fiercely, but Cleopatra's ships, filled with treasure and the hopes of a nation, did not follow his signal. Fearing for her son and her crown, she turned her vessel and fled. Antony, torn between love and duty, abandoned the fight and pursued her into the Ionian Sea. When the smoke cleared, Octavian's admirals had seized victory. Rome's banners flew over the conquered Eastern fleet. Antony returned to Alexandria broken, only to find Cleopatra preparing for defeat. In the palace, beside the silent Nile, their final moments were both tender and terrible. Antony, wounded and despairing, fell into Cleopatra's arms. "It is not Rome that betrays me, but my own heart," he whispered. Cleopatra, her beauty undimmed by sorrow, resolved to die on her own terms. She sent Augustus a message: let no Roman triumph over her spirit. Draped in royal purple, she pressed the asp to her breast, the ancient symbol of divine rebirth. Antony died beside her, his last breath a vow. Our story will echo beyond empires. As dawn broke, Octavian stood on Alexandria sands. He ordered Cleopatra's tomb sealed and the palace gates closed. Egypt fell silent under Roman law. The age of lovers and legions had ended. The world would remember their names not as conquerors, but as the last flame of a dying world. Chapter 9. The Prince of Peace Rome, 27 BCE. The city was at peace, at least outwardly. The turmoil of civil war, the bloodshed, and the ambition that had so long stained Rome's streets had subsided. Augustus, once Octavian, stood alone as the ruler of the Roman Empire. The Senate had, with great ceremony, bestowed upon him the title Princeps, the first citizen. It was a title that masked his true power, the undisputed ruler of Rome and her vast territories. Augustus looked out over the forum, his heart heavy with the weight of history. He had avenged his father's death, defeated his rivals, and rebuilt the empire from the ashes of civil war. But peace came at a cost. He had seen friends and family torn apart by ambition. Mark Antony, Cleopatra, even Brutus, men who had once been his allies, now either dead or exiled. The blood of Rome's greatest leaders stained the soil of its streets, and now it was his turn to steer the ship. The Republic was a memory, a thing of the past, replaced by a new order. His order. He was not blind to the contradictions of his rule. He spoke of restoring the Republic, but the Senate and the people of Rome knew it was a republic in name only. Augustus held the reins, guiding Rome through the quiet storm of peace. His reforms, his building projects, his patronage of the arts, all were designed to fortify his power and his legacy. But it was not only through force and politics that Augustus ruled. His greatest strength lay in his ability to shape the hearts and minds of the Roman people. He was no longer just a general. He was their father, their protector, their prince. The Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, was his gift to them, a peace that would last for 200 years. Yet, despite his success, Augustus was not without his doubts. At night, in the privacy of his chambers, he thought often of his lost youth, of the days when he was just Octavian, an ambitious nephew determined to avenge Caesar. He thought of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, and of Antony, his once close friend turned rival. Their deaths, though inevitable, still haunted him. They were his enemies, yes, but they had been part of his world, a world that no longer existed. His gaze returned to the forum, where the crowds gathered in worship and admiration. His reign was unchallenged, his power absolute. But in the depths of his soul, Augustus wondered if the peace he had brought to Rome was truly worth the sacrifice. Chapter 10, The Eternal Legacy Rome. 14 CE, the sun had begun its slow descent over the city, casting long shadows over the marble buildings of the Forum. Augustus, now an old man, stood by the window of his private chamber, gazing out over the empire he had built. It was a world unlike any that had come before, a world forged from the fires of war, ambition, and dreams.